who tracks his family's precious journey from the barrios of Santo Domingo to the tenements of industrial New Jersey, and their epic passage from hope to loss to something like love. Here's the soulful, unsparing book that made Diaz a literary sensation. So let's just read a little bit of the first story. This is entitled Fiesta 1980. Mammy's youngest sister, my tia, Irma, finally made it to the United States this year. That year. She and Tio Miguel got themselves an apartment in the Bronx off the Grand Concourse, and everybody decided that we should have a party. Actually, my pops decided, but everybody, meaning Mammy, Tia, Irma, Tia Miguel, and their neighbors, thought it was a dope idea. On the afternoon of the party, Pappy came back from work around 6, right on time. We were all dressed by then, which was a smart move on our part. If Pappy had walked in and caught us lounging around in our underwear, he would have kicked our asses something serious. He didn't say nothing to nobody, not even my mom's. He just pushed past her, held up his hand when she tried to talk to him, and headed right into the shower. Rafa gave me the look, and I gave it right back to him. We both knew Papi had been with the Puerto Rican woman he was seeing and wanted to wash off the evidence quick. Mammy looked really nice that day. The United States had finally put some meat on her. She was no longer the same flaca who had arrived here 3 years before. She had cut her hair short and was wearing tons of cheap-ass jewelry, which on her didn't look too lousy. She smelled like herself, like the wind through a tree. She always waited until the last possible minute to put on her perfume because she said it was a waste to spray it on early and then have to spray it on again once you got to the party. We, meaning me, my brother, my little sister, and Mammy waited for Pappy to finish his shower. Mammy seemed anxious in her usual dispassionate way. Her hands adjusted the buckle of her belt over and over again. That morning, when she had gotten us up for school, Mammy told us that she wanted to have a good time at the party. I want to dance, she said, but now with the sun sliding out of the sky like spit off a wall, she seemed ready just to get this over with. Rafi didn't much want to go to no party either, and me, I never wanted to go anywhere with my family. There was a baseball game in the parking lot outside, and we could hear our friends yelling, "Hey," and "Cabron," to one another. We heard the pop of a ball as it sailed over the cars, the clatter of an aluminum bat dropping to the concrete. Not that me or Rafi loved baseball. We just liked playing it with the local kids, thrashing them at anything they were doing. By the sounds of the shouting, we both knew that the game was close, or either of us could have made a difference. Rafi frowned, and when I frowned back, he put up his fist. "Don't you mirror me," he said. "Don't you mirror me," I said. He punched me. I would have hit him back, but Pappy marched into the living room with his towel around his waist, looking a lot smaller than he did when he was dressed. He had a few strands of hair around his nipples and a surly closed-mouth expression, like maybe he scalded his tongue or something. "Have they eaten?" he asked Mammy. She nodded. "I made you something. You didn't let him eat, did you?" "Ay, Dios mío," she said, letting her arms fall to her side. "Ay, Dios mío is right," Pappy said. I was never supposed to eat before our card trips, but earlier, when she had put out our dinner of rice, beans, and sweet platanos, guess who had been the first one to clean his plate? You couldn't blame Mammy, really. She had been busy, cooking, getting ready, dressing. My sister Maldy. I should have reminded her not to feed me, but I wasn't that sort of son. Pappy turned to me. Cono muchacho, what did you eat? Why did you eat? Rafi had already started inching away from me. I had once told him I considered him a low-down chicken shit for moving out of the way every time Pappy was going to smack me. Collateral damage, Rafa had said. Ever heard of it? No. Look it up, chicken shit or not. I didn't dare glance at him. Pappy was old-fashioned. He expected your undivided attention when you were getting your ass whooped. You couldn't even look him in the eye. That wasn't allowed. Better to stare at his belly button, which was perfectly round and immaculate. Pappy pulled me to my feet by my ear. If you throw up, I won't, I cried, tears in my eyes, more out of reflex than pain. Yeah, Ramon, yeah. It's not his fault, Mammy said. They've known about this party forever. How did they think we were going to get there, Fly? He finally let go of my ear, and I sat back down. Madai was too scared to open her eyes. Being around Pappy all her life had turned her into a major league wuss. Anytime Pappy raised his voice, her lip would start trembling, like some specialized tuning fork. Rafa pretended that he had knuckles to crack, and when I shoved him, he gave me a don't start look. But even that little bit of recognition made me feel better. I was the one who was always in trouble with my dad. It was like, my God, given duty to piss him off, to do everything the way he hated. Our fights didn't bother me too much. I still wanted him to love me. Something that never seemed strange or contradictory until years later when he was out of our lives. By the time my ears stopped stinging, Pappy was dressed and Mammy was crossing each one of us solemnly, like we were headed off to war. We said in turn, Bendición, Mammy, and she poked us in our 5 cardinal spots while saying, Que Dios te bendiga. This was how all our trips began, the words that followed me every time I left the house. None of us spoke until we were inside Pappy's Volkswagen van. Brand new lime green and bought to impress. Oh, we were impressed. But me, every time I was in that VW and Pappy went above 20 miles an hour, I vomited. I'd never had trouble with cars before. That van was like my curse. Mammy suspected it was the upholstery. In her mind, American things, appliances, mouthwash, funny-looking upholstery all seemed to have an intrinsic badness about them. Pappy was careful about taking me anywhere in the VW, but when he had to, I rode in front in Mammy's usual seat so I could throw up out the window. ¿Cómo te sientes? Mammy asked over my shoulder when Pappy pulled onto the turnpike. She had her hand on the base of my neck. One thing about Mammy, her palms never sweated. I'm okay, I said, keeping my eyes straight ahead. I definitely didn't want to trade glances with Pappy. He had this one look, furious and sharp, that always left me feeling bruised. Toma, Mammy handed me 4 mentas. She had thrown 3 out her window at the beginning of our trip, an offering to Issue. The rest were for me. I took one and sucked it slowly, my tongue knocking it up against my teeth. We passed Newark Airport without any incident. If Madai had been awake, she would have cried because the planes flew so close to the cars. "How's he feeling?" Pappy asked. "Fine," I said. I glanced back at Rafa, and he pretended like he didn't see me. That was the way he was, at school and at home. Then I was in trouble. When I was in trouble, he didn't know me. Madai was solidly asleep. But even with her face all wrinkled up and drooling, she looked cute, her hair all separated into twists. I turned around and concentrated on the candy. Pappy even started to joke that we might not have to scrub the van out tonight. He was beginning to loosen up, not checking his watch too much. Maybe he was thinking that about that Puerto Rican woman, or maybe he was just happy that we were all together. I could never tell. At the toll, he was feeling positive enough to actually get out of the van and search around under the basket for dropped coins. It was something he had once done to amuse Madai, but now it was a habit. Cars behind us honked their horns, and I slid down in my seat. Rafa didn't care. He grinned back at the other cars and waved. His actual job was to make sure no cops were coming. Mammy shook Madai awake, and as soon as she saw Pappy stooping for a couple of quarters, she let out this screech of delight that almost took off the top of my head. That was the end of the good times. Just outside the Washington Bridge, I started feeling woozy. The smell of the upholstery got all up inside my head. I found myself with a mouthful of saliva. Mammy's hand tensed on my shoulder, and when I caught Pappy's eye, he was like, "No way, don't do it." The first time I got sick in the van, Pappy was taking me to the library. Rafa was with us, and he couldn't believe I threw up. I was famous for my steel-lined stomach. A third-world childhood could give you that. Pappy was worried enough that just as quick as Rafa could drop off the books, we were on our way home. Mammy fixed me on one of her honey and onion concoctions, and that made my stomach feel better. A week later, we tried the library again, and on this go-round, I couldn't get the window open in time. When Pappy got me home, he went and cleaned out the van himself, an expression of asco on his face. This was a big deal, since Pappy almost never cleaned anything himself. He came back inside and found me sitting on the couch, feeling like hell. "It's the car," he said to Mammy. "It's making him sick." This time, the damage was pretty minimal. Nothing Pappy couldn't wash off the door with a blast of the hose. He was pissed, though. He jammed his finger into my cheek, a nice, solid thrust. That was the way he was with his punishments, imaginative. Earlier that year, I'd written an essay in school called "My Father, the Torturer," but the teacher made me write a new one. She thought I was kidding. We drove the rest of the way to the Bronx in silence. We only stopped once, so I could brush my teeth. Mammy had brought along my toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste, and while every car known to man sped by us, she stood outside with me so I wouldn't feel alone. Tio Miguel was about 7 feet tall and had his hair combed up and out into a demi-fro. He gave me and Rafa big spleen-crushing hugs and then kissed Mammy and finally ended up with Madai on his shoulder. The last time I'd seen Tio was at the airport, his first day in the United States. I remembered how he hadn't seemed all that troubled to be in another country. He looked down at me. "Carayo, Junior, you look horrible." "He threw up," my brother explained. I pushed Rafa. "Thanks a lot, ass face." "Hey," he said, Tio asked. Tio clapped a bricklayer's hand on my shoulder. Everybody gets sick sometimes, he said. You should have seen me on the plane over here. Dios mío. He rolled his Asian-looking eyes for emphasis. I thought we were all going to die. Everybody could tell he was lying. I smiled like he was making me feel better. Do you want me to get you a drink? Tio asked. We got beer and rum. Miguel, Mammy said. He's young. Young? Back in Santo Domingo, he'd be getting laid by now. Mammy thinned her lips, which took some doing. Well, it's true, Tio said. So, Mammy, I said, when do I get to visit the DR? That's enough, Junior. It's the only pussy you'll ever get, Rafa said to me in English. Not counting your girlfriend, of course. Rafa smiled. He had to give me that one. Papi came in from parking the van. He and Miguel gave each other the sort of handshakes that would have turned my fingers into Wonder Bread. ¿Cómo compay? ¿Cómo va todo? They asked each other. Tia came out then with an apron on and maybe the longest Lee press-on nails I've ever seen in my life. There was this one guru motherfucker in the Guinness Book of World Records who had longer nails, but I tell you, it was close. She gave everybody kisses and told me and Rafi how guapo we were. Rafa, of course, believed her, told Madai how bella she was, but when she got to Pappy, she froze a little, like maybe she'd seen a wasp on the tip of her nose, but then kissed him all the same. Let's see how long this story is. Not promise how much. Mammy told us to join the other kids in the living room. Tio, wait a minute. I want to show you the apartment. I was glad Tia said, hold on, because from what I'd seen so far, the place had been furnished in contemporary Dominican tacking. The less I saw, the better. I mean, I liked plastic sofa covers, but damn, Tio and Tia had taken it to another level. They had a disco ball hanging in the living room and the type of stucco ceilings that looked like stalactite heaven. The sofas all had golden tassels dangling from their edges. Tia came out of the kitchen with some people I didn't know, and by the time she'd got done introducing everybody, only Pappy and Mammy were given the guided tour of the 4-room, 3rd-floor apartment. Me and Rafa joined the kids in the living room. They'd already started eating. We were hungry, one of the girls explained, a pastelito in her hand. The boy was about 3 years younger than me, but the girl who'd spoken, Letty, was my age. She and another girl were on the sofa together, and they were cute as hell. Letty introduced them. The boy was her brother, Wilkins, and the other girl was her neighbor, Mari. Letty had some serious titas, and I could tell that my brother was going to gun for her. His taste in girls was predictable. He sat down right between Letty and Mari, and by the way they were smiling at him, I knew he'd do fine. Neither of the girls gave me more than a cursory 1-2, which didn't bother me. Sure, I liked girls, but I was always too terrified to speak to them unless we were arguing or I was calling them stupidos, which was one of my favorite words that year. I turned to Wilkins and asked him what there was to do around here. Mari, who had the lowest voice I'd ever heard, said, "He can't speak." What does that mean? He's mute. I looked at Wilkins incredulously. He smiled and nodded, as if he'd won a prize or something. Does he understand? I asked. Of course he understands, Rafa said. He's not dumb. I could tell Rafa had said that just to score points with the girls. Both of them nodded. Low voice, Mari said, He's the best student in his grade. I thought, not bad for a mute. I sat next to Wilkins. After about 2 seconds of TV, Wilkins whipped out a bag of dominoes and motioned to me. Did I want to play? Sure. Me and him played Rafa and Letty, and we whooped their collective asses twice, which put Rafa in a real bad mood. He looked at me like maybe he wanted to take a swig, just one to make him feel better. Letty kept whispering into Rafa's ear, telling him it was okay. In the kitchen, I could hear my parents slipping into their usual modes. Pappy's voice was loud and argumentative. You didn't have to be anywhere near him to catch his drift. And Mammy, you could put 2 cups to your ears to hear her. I went into the kitchen a few times once so the Tios could show off how much bullshit I'd been able to cram in my head the last few years, another time for a bucket cup of soda. Mammy and Tia were frying tostones and the last of the pastelitos. She appeared happier now, and the way her hands worked on our dinner. You would think she had a life somewhere else making rare and precious things. She nudged Tia every now and then. Shit they must have been doing all their lives. As soon as Mammy saw me through, she gave me the eye. Don't stay long, the eye said. Don't piss your old man off. Pappy was too busy arguing about Elvis to notice me. Then somebody mentioned Maria Montez, and Pappy barked. Maria Montez? Let me tell you about Maria Montez, compai. Maybe I was used to him, his voice louder than most adults. It didn't bother me none, though the other kids shifted uneasily in their seats. Wilkins was about to raise the volume on the TV, but Rafa said, I wouldn't do that. Mute Boy had balls, though. He did it anyway, and then sat down. Wilkins' pop came into the living room a second later, a bottle of Presidente in his hand. That dude must have had spider senses or something. Did you raise that? He asked Wilkins, and Wilkins nodded. Is this your house? His pops asked. He looked ready to beat Wilkins silly, but he lowered the volume instead. See, Rafa, you nearly got your ass kicked. See, Rafa said, you nearly got your ass kicked. I met the Puerto Rican woman right after Pappy had gotten in the van. He was taking me on short trips, trying to cure me of my vomiting. It wasn't really working, but I looked forward to our trips, even though at the end of each I'd be sick. These were the only times me and Pappy did anything together. When we were alone, he treated me much better, like maybe I was his son or something. Before each drive, Mammy would cross me. Bendición, Mammy, I'd say. She'd kiss my forehead. Que Dios te bendiga. And then she would give me a handful of mentas because she wanted me to be okay. Mammy didn't think these excursions would cure anything, but the one time she had brought it up to Pappy, he had told her to shut up. What did she know about anything anyway? Me and Pappy didn't talk much. We just drove around our neighborhood. Occasionally he'd ask, how is it? And I'd nod, no matter how I felt. One day I was sick outside of Perth Amboy. Instead of taking me home, he went the other way on Industrial Avenue, stopping a few minutes later in front of a light blue house I didn't recognize. It reminded me of the Easter eggs we colored at school, the ones we threw out the bus windows at other cars. The Puerto Rican woman was there and she helped me clean up. She had dry, papery hands, and when she rubbed the towel on my chest, she did it hard, like I was a bumper she was waxing. She was very thin and had a cloud of brown hair rising above her narrow face and the sharpest black eyes you'd ever seen. He's cute, he said to Pappy. Not when he's throwing up, Pappy said. What's your name? She asked me. Are you Rafa? I shook my head. Then it's Junior, right? I nodded. You're the smart one, she said, suddenly happy with herself. Maybe you want to see my books? They weren't hers. I recognized some of my favorites must have... I recognized them as ones my father must have left in her house. Pappy was a voracious reader, couldn't even go cheating without a paperback in his pocket. Why don't you go watch TV? Pappy suggested. He was looking at her like she was the last piece of chicken on earth. We got plenty of channels, she said. Use the remote if you want. The two of them went upstairs, and I was too scared of what was happening to poke around. I just sat there, ashamed, expecting something big and fiery to crash down on our heads. I watched on a whole hour of the news before Pappy came downstairs and said, let's go. About 2 hours later, the woman laid out the food, and like always, nobody but the kids thanked them. It must be some Dominican tradition or something. There was everything I liked. Chicharrones, fried chicken, tostones, sancocho, rice, fried cheese, yucca, avocado, potato salad, a meteor-sized hunk of pernil, even tossed salad, which I could do without. But when I joined the other kids around the serving table, Pappy said, "Oh no, you don't," and took the paper plate out of my hands. His fingers weren't gentle. What's wrong now? Tia asked, handing me another plate. He ain't eating, Pappy said. Mammy pretended to help Rafi with the pernil. Why can't he eat? Because I said so. Why can't he eat? Because I said so. The adults who didn't know us made like they hadn't heard a thing, and Tio just smiled sheepishly and told everybody to go ahead and eat. All the kids, about 10 of them now, trooped back into the living room with their plates a-heaping, and all the adults ducked into the kitchen and the dining room, where the radio was playing loud-ass bachatas. I was the only one without a plate. Pappy stopped me before I could get away from him. He kept his voice nice and low so nobody else could hear him. If you eat anything, I'm going to beat you. Entiendes? I nodded. And if your brother gives you any food, I'll beat him too, right here in front of everybody. Entiendes? I nodded again. I wanted to kill him, and he must have sensed it because he gave my head a little shove. All the kids watched me come in and sit down in front of the TV. What's wrong with your dad? Letty asked. He's a dick, I said. Rafi shook his head. Don't say that shit in front of people. Easy for you to be nice when you're eating, I said. Hey, if I was a pukey little baby, I wouldn't get no food either. I almost said something, but I concentrated on the TV. I wasn't going to start it. No fucking way. So I watched Bruce Lee beat Chuck Norris into the floor of the Coliseum and try to pretend that there was no food anywhere in the house. It was Tia who finally saved me. She came into the living room and said, "Since you ain't eating, Junior, you can at least help me get some ice." I didn't want to, but she mistook my reluctance for something else. I already asked your father. She held my hand a while we walked. Tia didn't have any kids, but I could tell she wanted them. She was the sort of relative who always remembered your birthday, but who you only went to visit because you had to. We didn't get past the first floor landing before she opened her pocketbook and handed me the first of 3 pastelitos she had smuggled out of the apartment. Go ahead, she said, and as soon as you get inside, make sure you brush your teeth. Thanks a lot, Tio, I said. Those pastelitos didn't stand a chance. She sat next to me on the stairs and smoked her cigarette, all the way down on the first floor, and we could still hear the music and the adults and the television. Tia looked a ton like my mammy. The two of them were both short and light-skinned. Tia smiled a lot, and that was what set them apart the most. "How is it at home, Junior?" "What do you mean?" "How is it going in the apartment? Are you kids okay?" I knew an interrogation when I heard one. No matter how sugar-coated it was, I didn't say anything. Don't get me wrong, I loved my Tia, but something told me to keep my mouth shut. Maybe it was family loyalty. Maybe I just wanted to protect Mammy, or was afraid that Pappy would find out. It could have been anything, really. "Is your mom all right?" I shrugged. "Have there been lots of fights?" "None," I said. Too many shrugs would have been just as bad as an answer. "Pappy's at work too much." "Work," Tia said, like it was somebody's name she didn't like. Me and Rafa, we didn't talk much about the Puerto Rican late woman. When we ate dinner at her house, the few times Pappy had taken us over there, we still acted like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Pass the ketchup, man? No sweat, bro." The affair was like a hole in a living room floor. Once we'd gotten so used to circumnavigating that we sometimes forgot it was there. By midnight, all the adults were crazy dancing. I was sitting outside Tia's bedroom where Madai was sleeping, trying to not attract attention. Rafa had me guarding the door. He and Letty were in there too, with some of the other kids, getting busy, no doubt. Wilkins had gone across the hall to bed, so I had me and the roaches to mess around with. Whenever I peered into the main room, I saw 20 moms and dads dancing and drinking beers. Every now and then somebody would yell, "Quisqueya!" and then everybody else would yell and stomp their feet. From what I could see, my parents seemed to be enjoying themselves. Mammy and Tia spent a lot of time side by side, whispering, and I kept expecting something to come of this. A brawl, maybe. I'd never once been out with my family when it hadn't turned to shit. We weren't even theatrical or straight crazy like other families. We fought like 6th graders without any real dignity. I guess the whole night I'd been waiting for a blow-up. Something between Mammy and Pappy. This was how I always figured Pappy would be exposed out in public, where everybody would know, "You're a cheater." But everything was calmer than usual, and Mammy didn't look like she was about to say anything to Pappy. The two of them danced every now and then, but they never lasted more than a song before Mammy joined Tia again in whatever conversation they were having. I tried to imagine Mammy and Pappy. Maybe I was tired or just sad, thinking about the way my family was. Maybe I already knew how it would all end up in a few years. Mammy without Pappy, and that was why I did it. Picturing her alone wasn't easy. It seemed like Pappy had always been with her, even when we were waiting in Santo Domingo for him to send for us. The only photograph our family had of Mammy as a young woman before she married Pappy was the one that somebody took of her at an election party that I found one day while rummaging for money to go to the arcade. Mammy had it tucked into her immigration papers. In the photo, she's surrounded by laughing cousins I will never meet, who are all shiny from dancing, whose clothes are rumpled and loose. You can tell it's night and hot, and that the mosquitoes have been biting. She sits straight, and even in a crowd she stands out, smiling quietly, like maybe she's the one everybody's celebrating. You can't see her hands, but I imagined they're knotting a straw or a bit of thread. This was the woman my father met a year later on the Melcon, the woman Mammy thought she'd always be. Mammy must have caught me studying her because she stopped what she was doing and gave me a smile. Maybe her first one of the night. Suddenly I wanted to go over and hug her for no other reason than that I loved her. But there we were, about 11 fat jiggling bodies between us. So I sat down on the tiled floor and waited. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, Rafa was kicking me and saying, "Let's go." He looked like he'd been hitting those girls off, but he was all smiles. I got to my feet in time to kiss Tia and Tio goodbye. Mammy was holding the serving dish she had brought with her. "Where's Pappy?" I asked. "He's downstairs, bringing the van around." Mammy leaned down to kiss me. "You were good today," she said, and then Pappy burst in and told us to get the hell downstairs before some Pindio cop gave him a ticket. More kisses, more handshakes, and then we were gone. I don't remember being out of sorts after I met the Puerto Rican woman, but I must have been because Mammy only asked me questions when she thought something was wrong with my life. It took her about 10 passes, but finally she cornered me one afternoon when we were alone in the apartment. Our upstairs neighbors were beating the crap out of their kids, and me and her had been listening to it all afternoon. She put her hand on mine and said, "Is everything okay, Junior? Have you been fighting with your brother?" Me and Rafa had already talked. We'd been in the basement where our parents couldn't hear us. He told me that, yeah, he knew about her. "Pappy's taken me there twice now," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. What the hell was I going to say? "Hey, Junior, guess what happened yesterday? I met Pappy Sucia." I didn't say anything to Mammy either. She watched me very closely. Later I would think maybe if I had told her, she would have confronted him, would have done something, but who can know these things? I said I'd been having trouble in school, like that everything was back to normal between us. She put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed, and that was that. We were on the turnpike, just past exit 11, when I started feeling it again. I sat up from leaning against Rafa. His fingers smelled, and he'd gone to sleep almost as soon as he'd gotten to the van. Madai was out too, but at least she wasn't snoring. In the darkness, I saw that Pappy had a hand on Mammy's knee, and that the two of them were quiet and still. They weren't slumped back or anything. They were both wide awake, bolted into their seats. I couldn't see either of their faces, and no matter how hard I tried, I could not imagine their expressions. Neither of them moved. Every now and then, the van was filled with the bright rush of somebody else's headlights. Finally, I said, "Mammy," and they both looked back, already knowing what was happening. A little explicit, but if you want to read the rest of the book, I recommend it, since I'm only just getting into it. My first lecture video about this was quite interesting. So I'm going to be reading the whole thing in 2 parts. This is the first part this week that I'm reading. So I recommend this. And since this went a little bit longer for one story, I'll just end it at that. Thank you for joining me today for this little reading ASMR video. And I'll have more exciting things coming